Hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. You know those books you just can't put down? The ones that really stick with you?
Oh, absolutely. Those stories that really transport you to another world.
Well, today we're talking about what happens when those stories leap off the page and onto the screen.
Literary adaptations.
Exactly. We're diving deep into two powerful examples, The Help and The Handmaid's Tale.
Both of those have been adapted into hugely popular movies and TV shows, but it's always a challenge, right? Taking something from one medium and turning it into something else.
For sure. And with these two stories, we're dealing with some really heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Racism, feminism, social justice.
And what's interesting is how both The Help and The Handmaid's Tale kind of sparked these huge cultural conversations and even fueled real-world movements.
Okay, so let's start in Mississippi. Let's unpack The Help first. It takes place in the 1960s in Jackson, Mississippi.
During the Jim Crow era, so we're talking serious racial segregation here.
Right. And at the center of it all is Skeeter, this young white woman who wants to be a writer.
And she does something pretty daring for the time. She decides to write a book about the experiences of black maids working for white families.
Which is such a huge deal, because these women's voices were basically silenced. Back then, I mean.
Absolutely. They had no platform. So Skeeter's book is like shining a light on this hidden world.
And through her, we meet Aibileen and Minnie Crane-Steeds, these two black maids who are incredibly brave for sharing their stories.
And both the book and the movie do a great job of bringing those characters to life.
You really feel their strength and their resilience.
And the everyday injustices they had to face.
I remember there was some discussion about how the movie adaptation changed the focus a bit.
Yeah. The book has multiple narrators, Skeeter, Aibileen, and Minnie, so you get these different perspectives woven together. But the film leans a bit more on Skeeter's perspective.
So some people felt like that took away from Aibileen and Minnie's voices, you know, the very voices the story was trying to lift up.
It's a valid point. It raises the question of how faithful an adaptation needs to be to the source material.
Right, like how much can you change before it becomes a different story?
Exactly. It's a tough balance, especially when you're dealing with such sensitive themes.
For sure. But one thing's for certain, the performances in the movie were amazing. Viola Davis as Aibileen and Octavia Spencer as Minnie.
Phenomenal. They brought so much depth and emotion to their roles. You can't help but be moved by them.
Okay, are you ready for something completely different?
Lead the way.
Let's talk about The Handmaid's Tale. This dystopian masterpiece by Margaret Atwood.
Fasten your seatbelts, folks, because this one is a wild ride.
So picture this. The United States has been overthrown and replaced by Gilead.
This totalitarian regime that completely strips women of their rights.
And at the center of this world is Offred.
One of the handmaids forced into sexual servitude to bear children for the ruling class.
It's bleak. It's terrifying. And Atwood creates this world with such detail.
The social hierarchy, the color-coded clothing, it all feels so real and so oppressive.
Now in the book, we experience everything through Offred's eyes. It's her first-person narration. Her thoughts, her feelings. How does the TV show even begin to translate that visually?
Well, that's where the brilliance of the adaptation comes in. They use these powerful visuals. Think about that scene in the market where Offred is walking with her head down, surrounded by the eyes.
Oh yeah, chilling.
Right? It perfectly captures the atmosphere of constant surveillance, and then the use of color, the bright red of the handmaid's robes against the dull grays and greens of Gilead.
It's like a visual representation of their confinement.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they have no control over their own lives.
Exactly. And the TV series doesn't just adapt the book, it actually expands on it. We get more background on the characters and even some new storylines.
So it's like the TV show adds even more layers to this already complex world. And what I find really striking is how relevant The Handmaid's Tale feels today.
I know, right? Even though it was written decades ago, it's like Atwood had a crystal ball.
Seriously.
Yeah.
The novel has become this powerful symbol for feminist movements around the world.
People are using its imagery and its messages in protests and demonstrations. And look at what's happening with debates about reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. It's like we're seeing echoes of Gilead in the real world.
It's kind of scary how prescient Atwood was. But that's the power of dystopian fiction, right? It makes you confront these uncomfortable truths.
And imagine what could happen if we're not careful.
So we have The Help, this historical drama set in the segregated South, and The Handmaid's Tale, this dystopian nightmare of the future. Pretty different on the surface, but when you look closer...
You see, they both have something in common.
What's that?
They're both about women who challenge the rules and who fight for what they believe in even when it's dangerous. I mean, think about it. Skeeter risking everything to expose the injustices faced by black maids.
Right.
And then Offred defying this oppressive regime, just clinging to any hope she can find.
They're both rebels in their own way, pushing back against these really messed up systems.
And you know what? That's something that resonates across generations.
Yeah, for sure. These stories, especially their adaptations, they've really sparked these important conversations about race, gender power.
Speaking truth to power.
Giving a platform to voices that have been silenced for way too long.
And speaking of platforms, both The Help and The Handmaid's Tale have had a huge impact on actual cultural movements.
The Help, even though it sparks some debate about how it portrays race relations,
It definitely got people talking.
it brought these issues to the forefront. Racism, the legacy of slavery in America.
It made people think about privilege and perspective and whose stories get told.
And then you have The Handmaid's Tale, which has become like this iconic symbol for feminist movements.
It's everywhere, those red robes and white bonnets.
You see them at protests, in political cartoons, even fashion.
It's wild.
It just shows you the power of visuals. How an image can represent this whole complex idea.
Absolutely. The adaptation has really taken on a life of its own.
It's become this rallying cry for women's rights, for reproductive freedom, for fighting back against oppression.
It's amazing to see how fiction can inspire real-world action.
It makes you think about the responsibility of storytellers.
Oh, totally. Whether they're writers or filmmakers.
To use their platform to shed light on these important issues.
And also the power of adaptation, to bring these stories to a wider audience.
To get people talking and thinking about things in new ways.
It's interesting, though, how genre plays a role in how these stories are adapted.
How so?
Well, a historical drama like The Help, it aims for realism. It wants to transport you to that specific time and place.
Right.
But a dystopian story like The Handmaid's Tale, it often uses more stylized visuals to create this unsettling atmosphere.
So it's like each genre has its own set of tools for telling a story.
Yeah.
And those tools get translated into film or TV in different ways.
Exactly. Think about the colors and the camera work in a historical drama versus a dystopian story.
It's all about matching the visuals to the tone and the themes.
Right. And before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier about how faithful an adaptation needs to be.
Yeah. It's a tricky question.
It really is. There's no easy answer.
What parts of the story are essential? What can you change?
And how do you balance those choices with what the fans expect?
The Help and The Handmaid's Tale both sparked debates about this.
They did. But they also both managed to capture the essence of the original stories.
While still bringing something new to the table.
Great performances, stunning visuals, new storylines.
At the end of the day, a good adaptation is one that gets people talking, makes them think, and leaves a lasting impact.
And that's what makes both of these stories so powerful in their original form and as adaptations.
They've really become part of our culture.
They remind us that stories have the power to change the world.
Now, before we move on, have you seen either of these adaptations?
What resonated with you the most? What stayed with you?
I know for me, I always think about those scenes in Gilead, the way they control women's bodies.
It's chilling. And it definitely makes you think about what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, for sure. But you know what else I find interesting? Both The Help and The Handmaid's Tale, they offer this message of hope.
Yeah, I see that.
Even though they're dealing with some really dark stuff,
Yeah.
they show us that even when things are really bad,
People can still find a way to resist.
to fight back, to hold on to their humanity.
Like Aibileen and Minnie, finding strength in their friendship. Using their voices to challenge a system that was trying to silence them.
Exactly. And Offred clinging to her memories, to her sense of self, even as Gilead is trying to strip her of everything.
They both refuse to be broken.
And I think that's so important, especially for people who might be going through tough times themselves.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that you're not alone, that even small acts of defiance can make a difference.
And that's where adaptations come in, right? They can introduce these stories to a whole new audience.
And keep those conversations going.
It's like passing the torch,
Yeah.
keeping these stories alive.
And relevant.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into The Help and The Handmaid's Tale, I want to leave you with this. What other books do you think would make great adaptations?
What stories do you think need to be told on a bigger stage?
What book have you read that you can just picture coming to life on screen?
Let us know. We always love to hear your thoughts.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those stories coming.